They thought it was over. They thought the fire burned out. But fire doesn't destroy the chosen. It forges them. Hosted by Turbo, the CEO. New energy, new strategy. Every setback builds strength. Every loss builds strategy. And every leader rises again. The rebirth begins. Season 4. Bigger conversations. Real strategy. Power moves only. Monday motivation. Tech Tuesday. Merger Wednesday. Special guest Thursdays. Sit down Sundays. Season 4 starts now. Tap in or get left behind. Because bosses don't wait, they lead.
Test, test, test. Oh yeah, we good. We are on and popping. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, 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 yes. Welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome to the Final Boss Podcast, Sunday night edition. Sitting down with yours truly. Sitting down with the Final Boss. That's me, right? This is episode number 202. Man, this is the season of the rebirth. Season of the rebirth, man. Let me tell you. It is off to a great start. Hey, what's up, Dollar Bills? I see you. Who's that? There's Leopard dot 448. I see you. Who else is on here, man? I see Shakandi. I see the beautiful Andrea, the incomparable Andrea. Let me tell you. Man, that's some good stuff right there. Oh man, then I gotta follow it up with some good water. I did have a great Sunday, man. Today was a very revealing day. I need you to check your inbox. I sent you a message, Chakandi, and I need you to check that out and decipher and tell me what you get, man. I need that back ASAP, right? ASAP. Listen, man. Tonight. I Miss Andrea. I see you're late. I already recognized you for the evening, but I see you. I see you here. Look, episode number 202, right? 201, 202 is tonight. 202 is tonight. And tonight we're going to be discussing something that I'm not sure a lot of people are following, but it's a concept that I've been thinking about for some time now. And it's very applicable to what's going on today. So to my smarts, to my motivators, to my warriors, to my final bosses, and everyone in between, thank you for being here. I see all 19 of you who are watching from YouTube, man. Don't go nowhere. Stay right there, man. Stay right there. Listen, stay right there, right? I got a great show, and I need you guys to all be tuning in because right now we're going to take a moment of silence. We are going to take a moment of silence, right? It's a short moment. We're going to do 10 seconds, man. We're going to do 10 seconds, man. 10 seconds. You hear that? You hear that silence? It's not quiet. It's silence, right? There's a difference. Quiet is the absence of sound. Silence is what's left when you finally start performing. And most of us, we have been performing so long, we forgot what silence even feels like, right? We feel it. We feel it with noise, right? With work, with another goal, another grind session, right? Another identity to polish and something to present to the rest of the world. Some of us create busy work in the silence, right? Right? Because silence asks questions, right? And the questions silence asks, we are not always ready to answer, right? So tonight, we're going to answer them. We are going to answer them, right? Welcome to Sitting Down Sundays, episode number 202 of season 4, The Rebirth. I'm your host, the Final Boss, and I want to be very clear about what tonight is, right? And what it is not, right? It is not a hype session. It is not a tactical breakdown. It is not a checklist for your morning routine. Tonight is a conversation that lives inside the space most podcasts are too afraid to enter. But not us, not the Final Bosses, right? That's not what we do. We enter this space. We enter the most difficult of conversations, right? The space between who you were and who you have not yet become, right? The space has a name. And tonight we're going to spend this segment, right, living inside of it together. And tonight, the title of this episode is called To Become Nothing and Everything All at Once. Now, I need you to hear that as a statement of process, not poetics, because what I'm describing tonight is not a metaphor. It is a biological, psychological, and spiritual sequence that every human being who's ever truly transformed themselves has had to pass through, right? Without exception, without shortcuts, without the ability to skip to the good part, right? And here's the good thing. Here is the good thing nobody tells you about transformation. The version of yourself on the other side of it, the expanded, the sovereign, right? Fully expressed version. That person cannot be built on top of who you are right now, right? It can't. Which means something has to come down first, right? Something has to go, something has to die. And that is uncomfortable to say. It is even more uncomfortable to live through because when things start falling away, titles, roles, relationships, certainties, it does not feel like preparation. It feels like a collapse. And tonight, I'm here to tell you it is not collapse. It is a clearing, right? And there is a massive difference between the two. This is season 4 of the Final Boss podcast. It's called The Rebirth for a reason. That word was chosen with precision, not the restart, not the comeback, not the next chapter, the rebirth. Because a restart implies you pick up where you left off. A comeback implies something was taken from you. A next chapter implies the story is the same, just a new page, right? A rebirth implies that what emerges is fundamentally different from what went in. That is what this season is all about. That is what this episode is all about, right? And if you have been feeling the dissolve here lately, if you have been in that uncomfortable middle space where the old you doesn't fit anymore, where you tried to put that square into that circle and it's not working, right? The new you hasn't fully arrived yet. And that's what this episode is all about, right? So tonight, we're going to jump right in, right? And we're going to jump together, right? So stay with me. Stay with me. Don't go nowhere. Stay with me, right? This is Sitting Down Sundays, right? And if you are new here, welcome. Pull up a chair because this episode is the one you don't want to skip. And listen, we're here every Sunday at 9 p.m. live Eastern Time. And for all those who are new here, listen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And remember, this is for entertainment purposes only. Okay. Like I was saying, 9 p.m. Eastern Time live. Man, this is a live show, right? And we do something different from the rest of the week, right? Mondays through Sunday through Thursday, right? Sunday through Thursday. We start off with tonight, right? Sitting down Sunday. Then we move on into Motivation Mondays. And then we do Tech Tuesdays with the Sensei. And then we have Merger Wednesdays, right? And then we have special guest Thursdays, right? And all of those shows are about being in the real world, and we are doing the real work, right? But Sundays is special, man. Sundays is we sit here with no guests, right? No panel, no external expertise, just me and the mic, right? Me and the mic, and this chair, of course, right? And this big bright ass sign that's behind me. And we're here to do the interior work. That does not get a standing ovation, right? Sitting down is where I go inward, right? And I invite you to go inward with me, right? This is season 4, the Rebirth. And if you missed episode 201 this past Thursday with my brother Frank Zakari, he's a 5-time #1 best-selling author, co-founder of the Trust the Process marketing program with 17 consecutive #1 campaigns. Go back and get that episode, right? Frank brought something rare to the mic, and it wasn't just strategy. It was crafted, right? He brought the evidence that built things that last. That was the season opener, right? That was the foundation being poured, and tonight is the first wall that we put up. Now, let me tell you what we're going to talk about, man, because we're going to cover a lot of stuff tonight, right? We're going to excavate the identity, specifically how it goes assigned before we get old enough to question it. We're going to walk through what I call the dissolve, the biological, the psychological process of becoming undefined between versions of yourself. We're going to reframe the void, become the way most people have been taught to think about the void and what they see it as, because it's completely backwards, right? We're going to distinguish ego death from defeat, because those two things are not even the same category, and the confusion between them is costing people everything. We're going to expose the identity trap, the pattern of escaping one label and immediately constructing another. We're going to move into architecture, how to actually build from cleared ground, then the blueprint, the vision, the cost, and the letter, right? This whole segment, that's what this is about. And through this through line, right? I want you to understand something. You cannot pour wine into an old whiskey barrel, right? You cannot build an empire on a foundation designed for a smaller life. You cannot become who you are supposed to be while still carrying the full weight of who you were told to be. Something has to clear. Something has to open. Something has to, for a moment, become nothing, right? Listen, I've lived it. I'm living it. And I'm not talking about it from the comfort of the other side, right? I'm talking about it from the middle of it as it stands right now, which means this conversation is not theory. This is a testimony, right? And we get ready to get right into it, man. We get ready to start with the brass tacks of the evening. And listen, tonight's brass tacks. If you're new here, right? Every episode, we have a brass tacks, right? And every episode of Sitting Down, we usually open with what we call what I just told you, right? It's not a warm and fuzzy inspirational line for the vision board. It's a surgical strike, a single sentence that cuts through the noise and puts the blade of the whole conversation directly to the table. And those of you who've been here for a while, you know what I'm talking about. But I'm explaining for those newcomers, right? what the brass tacks is, right? And tonight's brass tacks comes from Carl Jung. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Full stop. Right? The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, right? The privilege of a lifetime. Think about that, right? Notice how he chose to call it. He didn't call it a task. He didn't call it a challenge. He didn't call it assignment. Or neither did he call it an obligation or responsibility, right? He said privilege, right? The act of becoming who you actually are in the category of gifts, rare gifts, lifetime scale gifts. And then ask yourself honestly, man, ask yourself this question. How many people you know have ever actually claimed that one statement, right? Carl Jung spent the better part of his career studying what he called individuation, right? The process of which a human being strips away the false selves that were constructed for survival and approval and protection and moved into its authenticity, right? That's what that's about, right? Listen, yeah, if you don't know who Carl Jung is, go read up on him, right? Understand that, right? Understand that process, right? Understand the terms that he speaks and where he's speaking from, right? It's time to open your minds, right? It's time to recognize that you've been handed the privilege of a lifetime. And tonight is about understanding that, right? So before you can understand what you're becoming, you have to get brutally honest about where the current identity actually came from, right? Not who you chose to be, not the person you consciously constructed through effort and decision. I'm talking about the deeper layer, right? I'm talking about the original you, the role that was written for you before you were even old enough to even audition for it. Because here is the truth that most people who understand personal development and conversations, they won't even tell you this. They skip over it entirely, right? The majority of people are not living their identity. They are living their inheritance, right? You were handed. You were handed. Listen, look, I might catch some backlash from this, but I need y'all to understand something, right? When you were born, you were handed a script, right? You were handed a script based on your family's needs, your community's values, your culture's requirements, the particular flavor of survival your household demanded, right? You were cast into a role. I was the firstborn. I was cast into that role. The responsibility of it, right? It was tough. It was invisible. You didn't even see it. I didn't even see it. You become the overachiever without even knowing it. You become the protector without even knowing it. You become the peacemaker without even knowing it. And somewhere early in your childhood, you learned with extraordinary speed and precision that performing that role was how you received love, safety, and belonging. So you learned how to perfect it, right? And that perfection, it took some time. But by time you turn 15, right? For 15, 20, 30, right? You've been performing in that role. And it no longer feels like your role. It feels like you, right? It has your fingerprints on it. It has your achievements in it, right? It has the respect of people who care about the things you've built around it. And so the question, right? And so the question, who are you or who are we without it? that becomes genuinely threatening, right? Because the honest answer is, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, right? But I will speak authentically and specifically, right? I was the disciplined one. I was the protector. I was all of those things that I mentioned. I was the soldier, right? I was the one who showed up and did not break, right? And that wasn't by accident. That was a survival strategy, right? That became a calling, that became a career, that became a personality. And birthday in a week, that's who I became, right? I earned the identity with blood and time and sacrifice. And I'm not minimizing it one single second. But here is what I had to confront, right? I had built an identity around being needed in a crisis, around function under pressure, around being the one who carries what others cannot, right? I always say, man, I have the weight of the world on my shoulders, right? And that identity, as honorable as it may sound, or as it was, it had a hidden cost. It taught me my worth was conditional, that I was valuable when there was a mission, that the absence of the mission meant the absence of me. That is a dangerous way to be wired. And it is something that I had to understand because missions end, right? Careers end, titles expire. And when the external structure that had the identity together gets removed, you find out very quickly whether there is a self underneath it or whether the self was always just a structure in disguise that was built on something you perceived from your childhood. Right? That question, what's underneath, right? That's the excavation, right? And the excavation is where we begin in season 4, the rebirth, right? Because, listen, man, let me tell you, the rebirth is going to be something. I'm telling you, each episode, each segment, each show is about rebirth, right? Nobody prepares you for the dissolve. I relished and was in that space of the dissolve, right? I went through all those things. There was no mission, right? There were no titles. I had to come out of that, man. Let me tell you, right? And I want to be specific about what I mean by that word because I'm not using it loosely. The dissolve is not burnout. Burnout is what happens when you push too hard for too long inside an identity that fits. Burnout is a resource problem. You ran out of fuel, refuel, and you could go again, right? Most people don't refuel. Most people pour so much out that they're empty and they don't have people around them to help them refuel. And they don't know how to refuel themselves, right? The dissolve is something categorically different. The dissolve is what happens when the identity itself stops fitting, right? When that square doesn't fit into that circle anymore, right? Not the pace of it, not the demands of it, the entire architecture of who you've been, right? The beliefs, the roles, the internal narrative, the way you explain yourself to yourself in the dark, in the mirror, right? It starts to feel wrong. Not wrong like a mistake, but wrong like a coat that fit perfectly 3 years ago, and now you put it on and something's off, right? Something's off about it. That's the feeling that I'm speaking of. That's the dissolve right there, man. Listen, and here's the science of it. You know, I like talking about science, right? Because I want to ground this in biology so it stops feeling like a personal crisis and starts feeling like an organic process, right? Think about the caterpillar. I talk about caterpillars all the time, right? The caterpillar enters the cocoon. Most people assume that the transformation is orderly. No, the caterpillar transformation into a butterfly is chaotic, right? This country, never mind. I'll leave that for another episode, right? I'll leave that for another episode. Let's get back to the caterpillar. The wings so slowly develop and the body slowly restructures. Most people think that's what happens. That's not what happens, right? What actually happens is that the caterpillar releases enzymes and that breaks down its tissue and the body. It digests itself. It becomes at a cellular level an undifferentiated biological soup, right? There is a period inside that cocoon where the organism is neither caterpillar nor butterfly. It has not fixed form yet, right? It is potential. It has not yet decided what it will be, right? That is the dissolve. That's the space. That's the void, right? And inside that soup, right? That caterpillar soup, inside what looks like complete destruction from the outside, something extraordinary is preserved. Scientists call them imaginary cells. These are clusters of cells that carry the blueprint of the butterfly. They were always there inside the caterpillar, dormant and ignored. The dissolution of the old form is what finally gives them the space to activate and organize and build the new one, right? The imaginary cells were always in you too. They're always in you when you change, right? When you shed skin, right? The vision you keep returning to, the thing that feels simultaneously outrageous and possibly inevitable, right? The identity that has been trying to surface through the cracks in the current one for years. That is your imaginary blueprint, right? And that's the dissolve. A disorienting as it sounds. It is what creates the conditions for what you become in your final form, right? The reason most people never fully transform is not lack of desire or lack of effort. It is what they feel when they're going through disillusion, right? Because when they go through that, they begin to panic. They reconstruct the old identity as fast as possible because it becomes intolerable, right? Because of other people who ask, "Who are you?" And they need an answer, right? Because the silence of not knowing feels like failure. But premature reconstruction is the enemy of transformation, right? You cannot rush the cocoon. You cannot emerge before the blueprint has fully organized. A butterfly that breaks out of the cocoon too early before the wings have fully developed cannot fly. It simply fails, right? You have to stay in the cocoon, right? You have to cook. You have to cook, right? You have to let the dissolve complete. The imaginary cells know what to do. You have to let the process continue, right? Now, there's a fundamental lie, right, embedded in the way Western culture has framed the inner life, right? And I'm gonna tell you about it, right? This lie is so persuasive and pervasive, right? So deeply woven into the religious, the philosophical, the psychological, all of those languages, right? And it's all inherited, right? That and here it is that most people have never once stopped to even question this one thing, right? And let me tell you about this. It's the lie of emptiness. It is the lie of emptiness. The lie that says emptiness is lack, right? That's a lie, right? We are taught from childhood that the void is something to escape. Every spiritual tradition frames it as a trial to be endured, a wilderness to be survived, a valley to be passed through on the way to somewhere better. The void is the waiting room, right? The dark night of the soul is the crisis before the dawn. You remember when Neo was at the metro station and they called it the void? He had to wait there. He had to wait there because it wasn't time for him to emerge, right? It wasn't time for Neo to emerge, right? It's a nothing, right? It's a nothing. A place that has no value of its own, only contrast value. But making the before and after, it makes it look so much dramatic. Look at Neo and how he emerged once he came out of the void, right? So that framing is backwards. You want to talk about quantum physics? Listen, in quantum physics, we call it the empty space, right? We call it the vacuum. It's not empty at all. It is seething with what physicists like to call 0 point energy, right? Virtual particles that are constantly flickering and fluctuations that represent pure potential in a state of constant creative activity, right? The vacuum is not absence. It is a matter that is fundamental in a pre-manifestation state. Energy that has not yet decided what it will form into, right? The most generative state in the physical universe is the state before structure. That is the void, and that's what you're standing in, right? When the titles are gone, when the role is unclear, when the missions no longer exist, when the resume no longer tells the whole story. When someone asks what you do and you pause a half second longer than you used to, that pause is not emptiness. That pause is potential that has not yet taken form. The pause is the 0 point. That pause is most creative state you have ever occupied, right? Listen, the mistake, the transformation killing mistake is trying to fill it immediately, right? That's what most people do out of fear, right? Out of fear, right? The new job, the new title, the new community, the new framework to organize around yourself, right? Because silence is unbearable and undefined feels like failure. And we live in a culture that does not know how to honor that space, right? But a field does not become more fertile by being planted faster after the harvest. It becomes fertile by being left alone, right? By receiving the rest it needs to rebuild its mineral composition, right? By doing what looks like nothing while everything regenerates underground, right? The void is asking you one question, right? Not what you would do next, not where you will land, but who are you when nothing is required of you? That's when you find out who you really are, right? That's who you find out when you know who you really are. What is that thing that persists when the performance stops? What do you return to when no one is watching and no outcome is attached? That answer, that quiet, that persistent frequency, right? That persistent frequency that has been running beneath every role you've ever played. That is not nothing. That is everything. Waiting for you to stop being busy long enough to hear it. A lot of times it's what parents go through when the children leave the home. They don't know what to do. A lot of parents, right? I'm telling you, man, that's the void. That's when you find out who you really are. in that space, right? Now, I want to make a distinction that I believe is the most important thing that I'm going to say on this mic for season 4, right? Because I don't want there to be any confusion on two things, right? We talked about ego death and kill the ego. And we talked about defeating the inner me, right? It's what keeps capable, battle-tested, intelligent people locked inside identities that have already expired because they keep retreating back to that, right? Defeat is external. Defeat is what happens when the world overpowers you, when circumstances win and you lose, when someone or something takes something from you that you could not protect. Defeat has an opponent, right? Defeat has a scoreboard. Defeat arrives uninvited and leaves a mark, right? Ego death, on the other hand, right, is none of those things. Ego death is an act of sovereign will. It is the conscious, deliberate decision to lay down a version of yourself, right? Not because it failed you, but because you have outgrown it, right? Not because the world forced you out of it, but because your own growth made it too small to live in any longer, right? Understand what the ego actually is before listen. You have to understand it before we go any further. You must know what it is, right? You must know what it is. And I'm not using that, and I'm not saying it in a form where I don't know, man. Let's see. It could be used. I'm using a synonym, synonym. Sorry about that. A synonym in place of it, right? In place of arrogance, right? We're not talking about arrogance. We're talking about the ego. And this is and we're going to be talking about it from a precise psychological sense, right? It's a narrative of self, the story you tell about who you are, assembled from memory, right? Identity, role, and social reflection. It is the operating system that creates continuity between yesterday, right, and today. It's necessary, it's functional, and without it, you cannot operate in this world. But operating systems, they become obsolete. I spoke about that in season 3. When you need to upgrade the OS, right? When you're running a version of yourself designed for a life you no longer live, you're still running on that old OS, right? You no longer hold on to those things, man. A relationship that no longer exists, a mission already completed, that operating system is trying to protect you, right? It's trying to protect you, but it's limiting you, like Windows 10, right? It's running in the background. It's running processes in the background, and it is draining resources. Some people want to know why their phones get so hot sometimes, right? You got to upgrade. It's time to upgrade, right? It's making decisions based on threat assessments, right? From a context that no longer exists or applies. The warrior keeps fighting a war that ended. That warrior isn't brave. He's stuck, right? And laying down that sword specifically, right? Or choosing to lay it down after the war has been won. That's not weakness. It is the intelligence to read the room and understand that the next phase of the mission requires tools that soldier currently does not carry. You got to read the room, right? And to my smarts, to my motivators, to my warriors, to my final bosses, right? I want to speak to you guys, right? Especially to the veterans, right? My veterans out there. Because Frank touched on a lot of things on episode 201 from a veteran's perspective, right? Some of those things touch me really because, I'm near and dear to my veterans community, right? But there's particular tension in the military culture right now that rarely gets called out, right? Because in service conditions, you find um when in service, you find what the mission is. You know what the mission is, right? You know what the mission is. You know what your identity is. You know what your roles are. You know what your rank is, right? And you understand yourself through those lens of duty, right? Those aren't flaws. Those are features. They keep people alive in combat and functional under pressure. But they make the transition extraordinarily difficult because the military identity is not just a job, it is a total architecture. It is a language, community, purpose, structure, and self-concept all in one. And when it ends, right? Even when you choose for it to end, the ego does not know what to do with the silence. That's disorientation, right? That's disorientation. And that's not defeat, right? It just needs to be renovated, right? The old identity graduated. That is the only thing I can say about that, right? The old identity graduated. And the graduation requires you to leave the building and go do something new, right? Now, now, now we get to the trap, right? Because the trap is sophisticated. It looks like progress. And it catches almost everyone who makes it through the dissolve, including people who should know better, right? And here's how it works. This is the trap, right? You survive the void. The clarity starts coming back. The imaginary blueprint begins to activate. You get a glimpse of who you are becoming. And then before the new identity has fully formed, before it has been tested, before it has any depth or roots to it, you announce it, you brand it, you build a social media presence around it. You start performing the new self with the same intensity you performed as the old one, right? And you tell yourself this, right? You tell yourself this. You say, self, this is momentum. This is execution. This is the new me in motion. But that's the trap. That's the trap, my friends. Because what you have done is interrupted a formation process by turning it into content. You have taken something that needed to grow in the dark and dragged it into the light before it had roots. And things that are pulled into the light before they have roots, they're not grounded, right? And the first significant storm will expose it, right? The identity trap is label swapping dressed in transformation, right? Listen, I've had a lot of titles, right? I had a lot of titles. On the surface and on paper, they look great, right? They look like genuine evolutions, even now, right? But if the internal architecture did not change, if you haven't transformed or transferred those performance patterns, if you still have the need for external validation or conditional self-worth, then nothing actually transformed at all. The costume changed, right? The costume changed, and you're in a new season of Halloween, right? The character didn't. And here's how you diagnose it, right? And you have to ask yourself this question honestly. Ask yourself this. Do you need people to see the new you right now? Not eventually right now. today immediately, right? Do you feel a low-grade anxiety when the transformation is not visible to your audience? When people still reference the old title, does it feel like erasure rather than just inaccuracy? If the answer is yes, then you're caught in the trap, my friends. You are caught in the trap, right? Because real transformation does not need an audience during formation. Real transformation does not perform itself into existence. Real transformation is a private act that becomes publicly undeniable over time, right? Not because you announced it, not because the weight and consistency of it becomes impossible for you to misread, right? Think about the people in your life who have truly transformed, not rebranded, but truly have transformed, right? When they walk into a room after they change, they felt it before they said a word. Something settled in how they occupied space, something that did not need your confirmation, right? That settledness takes times to build. That's what happens in the cocoon, right? It can't be rushed into existence by announcement. You can't go from the caterpillar to the butterfly rushed. You're going to fail. You won't have wings. You won't become beautiful, right? That work is what this season is about, right? We must become the thing. I said in season three, the reckoning was the pursuit. Season 4 is what we become. We become the thing. You become the smarts. You become the motivator. You become the final boss. You become the warrior, right? Fully, privately, rooted with roots and foundation. And that's before the brand catches up, right? And you're going to see this. You're going to pay attention and witness as it happens right here in real time, right? Real time. The brand will catch up. It always does, right? But only if it's real, right? Only if it's real. Now, let me tell you, right? We're going to stop talking about philosophy. We're going to talk about practice, right? Because everything discussed in the last couple of segments, right? We talked about the dissolve. We talked about the void. We talked about ego death. We talked about the trap. All of it is a diagnostic. It tells you what is happening and why, but diagnosis without prescription is just educated suffering, people. Listen. So let's talk about what you actually do with the nothing. Yeah, you sit down. Sit your ass down. You ain't going. Look, no bathroom break, no hallway pass. It is, listen, take some notes, right? First thing, the nothing is not a passive state. It is not something that happens to you while you wait for clarity to arrive. The nothing is an active practice, right? You cultivate it, you tend it, you protect it from the people and pressures that want to rush you out of it prematurely, right? Prematurely, right? And here's the architecture of the clearing, right? 3 deliberate practices in one sequence, right? Practice number 1. You know, I'm going to tell you, you need to audit. You need to audit. You need to audit, man. Identity audit. Get a sheet of paper right now, right? Don't use your phone. Get a sheet of paper. Write down every label you currently carry, right? Every role, every title, every identity category you belong to. Don't filter it out. The whole inventory. If you're a mom, put that on there too. If you're a dad, put that on there too. If you're a first cousin, put that on there too, right? That's a title. Then go through each one and ask 3 questions. Did I choose this? And be honest. Did you choose it? Right? Did you choose it? Or was it assigned? Right? Does this label expand me or contain me? What would I lose socially or eternally if I release it? Right? The labels that were assigned, that contain you and that you are holding because of social costs rather than genuinely fit. Those are under examination, right? You do not have to be released. You do not have to be released from them today. The audit is not demolition. It is an assessment. You cannot renovate what you have never honestly inventoried, right? We playing a game of logistics, right? And then practice number 2. This is the tolerance of the undefined. This is the hardest practice, right? It requires sitting in the discomfort of not having a clean answer to the question of who you are right now. The test is simple, right? Pay attention. The next time someone asks you what you do and you feel the pull to reach for the old title even though it no longer applies, right? You pause. You notice the pull, right? You notice the discomfort underneath it, right? And you sit in that discomfort for about 2 seconds, right? 2 seconds longer than you probably should have, right? Give patience, right? The 2-second extension is the practice. And over time, 2 seconds becomes 5, 5 seconds become 30, 30 becomes the ability to live in the hyphen without panic, right? And then practice number 3, you focus on the frequency, right? Because underneath every role you have ever played, there has been a persistent signal, right? A set of questions you return to, a type of problem you cannot stop wanting to resolve, a mode of engagement that makes time disappear. That frequency was present in every version of you, right? Running quietly beneath the performance. In the cleared space of the nothing, that frequency becomes audible for the first time without the noise of the role competing with it. Write that down, right? Write it down when you hear it, not as a plan, but as an observation. What I am drawn to when nothing is required. What keeps surfacing, right? That is the seed. That is the blueprint. That is the imaginary cells we've been talking about since the beginning, right? The clearing creates the conditions for you to germinate the seed, right? Because rebirth is not a moment. Rebirth is a momentum. Right? The culture we live in, the viral culture, the highlight reel culture, the overnight success narrative culture has thoroughly corrupted the way people think about transformation, right? Everyone is looking for the moment, the turning point, the one conversation or one realization or one morning run where everything clicked and the new identity snapped into place. It doesn't work like that, right? That moment does not exist, right? Or more precisely, it exists as a retrospective construction, right? You look back from established change and the identity and the inflection point, right? That feels like it was the cause, but it was not the cause. It was the visible crest of the enormous wave that had been building underwater for months or years before anyone even saw it, right? Rebirth is the accumulation of small sovereign choices made consistently, compounding over time until the delta, right? The delta between who you were and who you are becomes undeniable. Every day you choose the new orientation over familiar comfort, the wave grows. Every day you resist the pull back into the old identity, the new one gains ground. Every day you act from the blueprint instead of the inheritance, the architecture becomes more real. Not glamorous, right? Not glamorous. Right? Don't make good content in real time, right? But it will make extraordinary people in the long arc, right? Listen, as I on my way to completing my MBA, man, right? It's closing a chapter, an academic chapter, or one part of it, right? That was disciplined and strategic, right? It's preparing me for the next level, right? It's preparing me for the next level. It's positioning me, right? Just like you, right? That expertise is being built right now in the field that would define the next couple of decades of who you are, right? Let the seeds germinate, right? The things are being built right now, right? The things are being built right now. All of it, right? Everything that you're doing, every single thing, right? Treat it like a blueprint, not as a vision board, not a manifestation exercise. Treat it as operational architecture for a life being built with full intention, right? Every brick in that architecture that you're building was made possible by declaring. You cleared the field, right? Nothing made room for everything. The void made room, right? Now, I want to paint a picture for you, right? I want to paint a slight picture for. Oh, I got a couple minutes. Um, hmm. Let me think. Um, hmm. You know what? We're gonna go. We might go over. Hmm. We might go over, people. But stay with me, right? Stay with me. Something I want you to know about this show, right? This show does not sell you a version of transformation that leaves an invoice for you, right? So let me tell you what all of this is going to cost. And I'm gonna be honest, specifically, right? And the first cost is relational, right? When you change at the level that I'm discussing tonight, when the actual core of who you are begins to shift, you're going to notice some relationships cannot make the crossing. As they say, you everybody can't come with you, right? When the actual core of who you are, right? You understand the frequency, right? You understand the frequencies that change, the resonance that changes, and those connections cannot span the distance, right? People who love the old you, who built their understanding of you on the version that is dissolving, will sometimes experience your growth as a kind of abandonment, right? Because the you they knew needed things from them, and that new you no longer needs them, right? That gap is uncomfortable, and it can be uncomfortable for both parties, right? You were going to lose some people, not all of them, but some, right? And the ones you lose, even when the parting is mutual, civil, and even loving, leave a specific kind of silence that is different from the productive silence of the void. That one is just loss. You name it as loss, right? You grieve it and you keep moving, right? The second cost is the eternal one, and it is ongoing. The ego does not surrender in a single session. It is not defeated in one breakthrough conversation, right? Or one episode of guess what? Sitting down with the final boss, right? It comes back, and it comes back in the form of an imposter, right? Through imposter syndrome. In a voice that appears at 2 a.m. when the room is quiet and the performance of the day has ended, asking who exactly you think you are. I, mine ask me this question all the time. Sometimes I just tell them to shut up, right? Right? Just someone who decided to call themselves those things and is hoping the world doesn't notice the gap, right? The voice is not wisdom. It is the old operating system running a defensive program, right? But it sounds like wisdom because it uses your own voice and your own memories. And guess what? It knows your history. It knows your insecurity, right? Talked about it. Go check it out in Go Time All Aboard the Fire of Train, right? You have to learn to hear it clearly enough to identify it and dismiss it without letting it stall you. The third cost, of course, is time. The lag between planting and harvest. We live in an immediate result culture. The gap between action and feedback has been compressed by technology to the point when people have genuine neurological difficulty tolerating the lag time that serious work requires, right? They can't cope. A lot of people, you want to talk about crashing out? That's why people crash out, right? People crash out. The rebirth blueprint is not a 90-day sprint. It is a multi-episode campaign. And it's going to cover the span of 100 episodes, right? And when there are going to be days when the vision is clear and the energy is high and the timelines feel appropriate, right? And on those days when nothing has visibly moved and the sacrifices are fresh and a question of whether this was the right call resurfaces, the timeline feels like punishing because you're constantly watching. And nobody's liking your pictures. Nobody is liking your rewards. Nobody is liking that you just had a great accomplishment, right? It feels like punishment, right? But get this, those experiences are the same process that I've been speaking about, right? Understand that wearing the crown is real. The cost is real. One does not exist without the other, right? And now listen, I want to do something different real quick, man. As this is the first solo segment of the season, right? For the new season, season 4. I want to do something different. All right. Pollen was really hot today, man. I was outside earlier, man, and my nose is itching like crazy. And I got the sniffles, man. The pollen is crazy. That's weird. So bear with me, right? This is something I've never done on this format, right? On this podcast. And I want to invite you guys to do it with me, right? We're not talking about on social media. We're talking about right now, right? Wherever you are, right? I want to read something to you. I want to read something to you. And it was a letter to myself, right? One of those conversations that I had with self, right? When we're talking about ego of self, identity of self, right? And listen, this is not performance. This is the actual interior work of the rebirth. The formal acknowledgement of what was, right? So that it does not have to be dragged forward into what is coming. Because one of the things that stalls people in the transition in the absence of closure is the old identity just fades without being properly honored or released. And the things not released tend to resurface at the worst possible moments in the form of old patterns, old fears, and old self definitions, right? And it hijacks your whole process. It hijacks your upload of your new OS, your new operating system, right? and it defaults back to the old operating system, right? And here it is, man. Here's a letter, right? Here it is. Bear with me. To the one who held the line when no one else could, right? I need you to know that I see the full weight of what you carried. Not the version of it that gets talked about, right? The real weight, the kind that does not make it to the achievement award, right? You were 18 the first time that you had to be an adult, right? Sitting in a room full of other adults, and all of y'all are falling apart. You learned very quickly that your steadiness was a resource that other people drew from freely and rarely replenished. And because you were built for it, because it came naturally, you told yourself it was not costing you anything. That was a lie you told yourself with great conviction for a very long time, right? Afghanistan, Iraq, 9/11, 23 years of showing up at an institution on the days that it needed you and the days it did not even seem to notice you. You did not perform that service for recognition. You performed it because it was right. The integrity is not diminished by the fact that the institution was finite. But I need to tell you something I could not have told you while you were still in it. The mission was never the whole of you. You believed it was. The structure made it easy to believe. But the parts of you that had nothing to do with the mission, the parts that asked questions the uniform could not answer, the imagined things the rank could not contain, that burned with a vision the federal system had no category for. Those parts were not subordinate. They were not distractions. They were the signal that was always trying to get through. You kept them quiet because the mission required it. The mission is complete. The signal does not need to be quiet anymore. What comes next does not replace what you were, it fulfills it. Every discipline you earned, every lesson extracted from every hard thing, every ounce of character built in the places no one was watching, it belongs to the new version. You are not being left behind. You are the foundation. Welcome to the rebirth, right? Now, to my veterans and everyone listening, to my smarts, to my warriors, to my motivators, to my final bosses, I recommend writing yourself a letter and then going back and reading that letter to yourself in a year or so, right? Because and you can write yours tonight, right? Before you go to sleep, right? Start off with a paragraph, right? And then keep writing until you don't want to write anymore, right? And keep adding to it. Because what matters is that you say goodbye to the version that got you here. You honor it, right? Because it deserves honor. That version is coming. The version that is coming needs room to fully arrive, right? Now, as we get ready to close out, right? Before we close, I want to speak directly to each segment of the community because the episode carries different weight depending on where you are in this process. That's why it's important to understand who you are in this community, right? And to my final bosses, my empire builders, right? I want to name something specific. I want you to name something specific. There is a version of the identity trap that high achievers fall into with particular frequency, right? It is the trap of confusing productivity with transformation. You can be extremely busy building the external architecture of the new life while the interior work of actually becoming the new version goes undone. The blueprint from segment 10, right? The credentials, the books, the business, the legacy, excuse me, all of the external structure is meaningless if the interior architecture does not match it. You cannot build a house you do not know how to live in. Do the interior work alongside the external building. Do them both simultaneously, right? And to my warriors, you have survived conditions that would disqualify most people's complaints. And I say this with full respect for what survival takes. Surviving and transforming are not the same practice. Survival required suppression, compartmentalization, making yourself hard enough or small enough or invisible enough to get it done. Those are legitimate life-saving adaptations, but they are adaptations, not permanent settings. The work of this season is to examine which of those adaptations still serve you and which have become limitations wearing the costume of strength. The examination takes more courage than the battles that you've been in, because the battles had a clear enemy. This, my friends, does not. And to my smarts, take the framework and stress test it, right? The individualization process that Carl Jung describes has been validated across cultures, disciplines, and centuries of human testimony. James Hollis calls it the passage to the larger life. Joseph Campbell calls it the belly of the whale. Victor Frankl calls it the confrontation with the void that precedes the discovery of meaning. These are not self-help frameworks. These are observations about the deep structure of human development that have held across every continent, or every context, I should say, that you've been applied in, right? Do your own research. Let the evidence lead, right? Let the evidence lead. And to my motivators, lastly, the coaches, the leaders, the people whose calling is to help others become more than they currently are. The most powerful thing you can offer the people you lead is not strategy or inspiration or accountability. It is permission and safety to be in the dissolve without shame. Most people in transformation are hiding it, performing wellness while privately falling apart. When you model the willingness to be in the process publicly, not for a polished result, the actual ongoing process, you give everyone around you permission to be honest. That is the most transformational or most transformative leadership act that you can give, right? That's available. Oh, sorry. I forgot about my final bosses. Apologies, right? Carl Jung, right? Aeon researches into the phenomenology of the self, right? The individuation theory that is fully developed, right? James Hollis, the middle passage, right? Victor Frankl, man's search for meaning, and Go Time, the 6 pillars of the fired up train methodology, the foundational operating system for everything discussed tonight. Available now. All books are sold, right? Go pick up the fired up train. All aboard the fired up train. Go Time, right? Now, give me a couple minutes. We're about to be done. Let me hold the threads together, right? Before I let you go. Because this is the kind of episode where each segment builds on the last, and the close, right? Where we are is where it all becomes one thing, right? We started with an inherited identity, a script handed to you before you had the language to question it. We walked through the dissolve as a crisis, but as biology, right? As the necessary cellular soup that precedes the butterfly. We reframed the void from absence to potential, from punishment to clearing, from waiting room to the most generative space a human being can occupy, right? We distinguish ego death from defeat. And we did it precisely, right? Clinically, without apology, right? We named the identity trap and described its mechanism. We built the architecture of the nothing and the blueprint of the everything. We looked at what full alignment actually feels like when from the inside. We named the costs without softening them. And we wrote the letter, right? The formal interior release of the version of ourselves that carried us here. That is the complete curriculum, right? Not an acting workshop. This is life in motion, people, right? The world is going to keep assigning you, right? That does not stop where you become conscious of it or not. It actually intensifies because as you become more fully yourself, the people and the systems that benefited from your old compliance will push back. Institutions will remind you of who they need you to be. Old relationships will pull forward and toward familiar patterns, right? The culture will often offer you 1,000 comfortable gift boxes, right? And 1,000 subtle punishments for refusing to fit in them, right? Every day is a choice. Accept the assignment or author the answer, right? Authoring the answer does not mean rejecting everything that came before. It does not mean burning down what you built or disowning who you were or performing some dramatic reinvention for an audience, right? It means holding the pen. It means refusing to let the story of your life be written entirely by forces external by you, right? Or external to you. It means doing the work, the quiet, the unglamorous, private, ongoing work of becoming the most fully expressed version of what was always inside you. You're not too late for this. You're never too old for this, right? Whatever age you are, whatever you have been going through, whatever the gap between where you are and where you know you should be, it's not too late. The imaginary cells do not have an expiration date. The frequency running beneath every role you have ever played is still running in the background. The blueprint is intact. What is required is the courage to clear the ground and begin, right? Till the land, plant the seeds, let them germinate, right? It's for a season. We're in season 4, the rebirth. And season 4 is alive, right? The rebirth is underway. And the best episode of this show, right? End of your life has not aired yet, right? It is the one being written right now. In the clearing, in the silence, in the void, in the nothing that is becoming everything. Go write it. Go write that out. In the nothing that is becoming everything, right? And I'll see you again. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow night. I'll see you again tomorrow night for Motivation Monday, right? Motivation Monday, right? For episode number 203. 203. Stay dangerous, stay disciplined, and as always, play Final Boss, right? Now, if that marinated with you, or resonated with you, I should say, let that marinate in your spine. Let it marinate in your spine. And remember, there's always a heavy pain that comes from discipline, but the pain of regret is even heavier. I am here. We are here. And as always, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That is our show for tonight. That is the end of episode number 201. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And as always, be balanced, be equal, and be smart. That is our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. Y'all have a great night. Talk to you soon. See you tomorrow for Motivation Monday.